Somewhere in the mountains of Mindanao, a Japanese general is staring at a map. He has 30,000 soldiers under his command. He has tanks, aircraft, artillery, and the full backing of the Imperial Japanese Army, one of the most powerful military forces on the planet in 1942. And he is losing to a man he has never seen. No photograph, no confirmed location, no name on any military record. Just a ghost who keeps appearing out of the jungle, destroying supply lines, ambushing patrols, and vanishing before anyone can fire back. The general increases the reward money. He sends more patrols into the hills. He threatens villages, bribes informants, and floods the jungle with soldiers. Nothing works. The ghost is still out there. His name is Wendell Fertig. He's an American mining engineer with zero combat experience. He has no tanks, no aircraft, no artillery, and no contact with the outside world. What he does have is 5,000 Filipino guerrillas who chose to follow him into the mountains rather than surrender to an empire, and a level of sheer stubbornness that history books have never quite figured out how to measure. This is the story of how one man and a ragged army of farmers, fishermen, and factory workers held an entire Japanese occupation force at bay for 3.5 years, and why the Philippines almost never got credit for it. Let's go back to the beginning. December 8, 1941. The day after Japan bombs Pearl Harbor, Japanese aircraft attack the Philippines. Within hours, American air power in the Pacific is nearly wiped out. General Douglas MacArthur, commanding Allied forces in the Philippines, watches his defenses collapse faster than anyone predicted. By April 1942, the largest surrender in American military history happens on the Bataan Peninsula. 75,000 Filipino and American soldiers lay down their weapons. They are marched 66 miles through the jungle without food or water in what becomes known as the Bataan Death March. Thousands die on that road. MacArthur himself escapes to Australia, leaving behind a famous promise, "I shall return." Japan now controls the Philippines, or so they think. Because in the mountains and jungles of Mindanao, the large southern island of the Philippine archipelago, something unexpected is happening. Soldiers who escaped the surrender are refusing to stop fighting. Civilians who watched their neighbors get beaten and killed by Japanese troops are picking up whatever weapons they can find. Former police officers, teachers, farmers, and fishermen are organizing in secret. They have no plan. They have no leader. They have almost no weapons. That is about to change. Wendell Fertig is not supposed to be a hero. He's a 40-year-old civil engineer from Colorado who came to the Philippines to build things, bridges, roads, mining infrastructure. He has a desk job. He wears glasses. He's balding. When the Japanese invasion begins, his job is technically to help blow up bridges so the enemy cannot use them, which he does. When the surrender order comes, Fertig makes a decision that will define the rest of his life.
He refuses to comply. He takes what supplies he can carry, links up with a small group of Filipino scouts and escaped soldiers, and disappears into the mountains of Mindanao. In his bag, he has packed one item that seems almost absurdly optimistic given his situation: a general's stars. Fertig pins those stars to his collar. He promotes himself to Brigadier General of the United States Forces in the Philippines. He has no authority to do this. Nobody gave him permission. He simply decides that if he is going to build a resistance army, people need to believe it is real. And a general's stars make it look more real than a mining engineer's business card. It works. Word spreads through the mountains fast. There is an American general in the hills who is still fighting. He has not surrendered. He is organizing. Filipinos come from everywhere. former Philippine army soldiers who escaped the surrender, civilian men who have watched the Japanese burn their villages, women who serve as intelligence carriers, smuggling information past Japanese checkpoints sewn into the hems of their dresses, priests who use their churches as hiding spots for weapons and radio parts, school teachers who draw maps of Japanese patrol routes from memory. Within months, Fertig has several hundred men, then 1,000, then 3,000. By mid-1943, his guerrilla force numbers somewhere around 35,000 across Mindanao. The exact count is impossible because they are everywhere and nowhere at the same time, organized into small cells that operate independently but strike coordinated blows. He calls his organization the United States Forces in the Philippines, 10th Military District. He issues ID cards. He sets up a court system. He establishes a postal service, complete with stamps, so that Filipinos under his protection still feel like citizens of something, not just survivors of an occupation. But the most important thing Fertig builds is a radio. Cobbled together from salvaged parts, powered by a hand-cranked generator, operated by a Filipino radio expert who barely sleeps, the radio changes everything. In January 1943, after months of silence, MacArthur's headquarters in Australia picks up a signal. The message reads, "Fertig commanding, we need help." MacArthur's staff are skeptical. They think it is a Japanese trick to lure in a supply submarine. One officer writes in his notes that whoever this person is, they are either a genius or completely insane, and that in their experience, the two qualities are not always that different. MacArthur orders contact maintained, but keeps expectations low. He cannot spare major resources for an unverified operation run by a self-promoted general with no military record. What Fertig sends back changes their minds. He begins transmitting detailed intelligence reports, Japanese ship movements in Mindanao's harbors, exact coordinates of airfield positions, numbers of troops stationed at specific garrisons, names of Filipino collaborators passing information to the Japanese, weather reports that help Allied aircraft plan bombing runs. The information is so precise, so consistently accurate, that MacArthur's intelligence officers cannot believe it is coming from a man living in a jungle hut, eating whatever his fighters can forage, moving his camp every few weeks to avoid Japanese patrols. One intelligence officer later says it was like having a spy satellite, except the satellite was a middle-aged engineer from Colorado who had decided not to accept defeat. Meanwhile, the Japanese are becoming desperate. Their early strategy for dealing with the guerrillas is the same one colonial powers always use: collective punishment. If a village is suspected of harboring resistance fighters, soldiers burn it, they execute civilians, they round up young men and interrogate them until someone talks. It does not work. This is the part of the story that most Western accounts get wrong. They tell it as Fertig's story, one clever American who outsmarted an empire. But the reason the Japanese cannot find him, cannot break the resistance, cannot stamp out the guerrillas no matter how much force they apply, is not Fertig's cleverness. It is the Filipino people.
In every village there are watchers. When Japanese patrols move, word travels ahead of them through a system of runners and signals, so fast that the guerrillas always know what is coming before it arrives. When soldiers search houses, weapons have already been hidden, fighters have already melted back into their normal lives, and everyone in the barrio tells the same story. They have not seen any strangers. They do not know anything. Children carry messages inside hollowed-out coconuts. Old women memorize patrol schedules and recite them back to resistance contacts who pass through their markets. Fishermen use their boats to move supplies along the coast at night, navigating without lights through waters they have known since childhood. The Japanese are fighting an army they cannot see because it looks exactly like the civilian population they are trying to control. Fertig's guerrillas do not just gather intelligence, they fight. They ambush Japanese supply convoys on jungle roads, hit them fast, take their weapons, and vanish before reinforcements can arrive. They destroy fuel depots. They cut telephone lines repeatedly. The Japanese repair them, the guerrillas cut them again, and this goes on for years like a grim, violent game. They raid small garrisons, free Filipino prisoners, and add the liberated soldiers to their own ranks. Each successful raid does something more important than the tactical damage. It proves to every Filipino on Mindanao that Japan is not invincible, that resistance is possible, that the occupation is not permanent. This matters more than any weapon. By 1944, Fertig's network has grown to the point where the Japanese cannot move freely through large parts of Mindanao without risking ambush. Entire regions have essentially slipped back out of Japanese control, not officially, but practically. The Japanese hold the cities and the main roads. The mountains, the jungles, and the coastal barrios belong to the guerrillas. MacArthur, preparing his return to the Philippines, begins taking Fertig seriously. Submarines start making contact, surfacing off remote beaches at night to drop off medical supplies, radio equipment, ammunition, and sometimes Filipino-American soldiers trained specifically to reinforce the guerrilla network. They take back intelligence packages so detailed that American commanders can plan their invasion with maps that show individual Japanese machine gun nests. When MacArthur finally lands on Leyte in October 1944 and delivers his famous "I have returned" speech, Fertig's guerrillas have already done years of work to make that return possible. They have tied down tens of thousands of Japanese troops who could have been fighting elsewhere in the Pacific. They have provided intelligence that saves American lives during the invasion. They have kept Philippine resistance alive during the darkest years of the occupation, when it would have been entirely reasonable for people to give up, collaborate, and simply survive. They did not give up. Here is what happens after the war ends. And this is the part that should bother you. Wendell Fertig returns to the United States, writes a memoir, and eventually gets a Hollywood film made loosely based on his story. He is celebrated as an extraordinary American hero, which, in fairness, he is.
The 35,000 Filipinos who made his operation possible, who hid weapons under their floorboards, who ran through jungle at night to carry messages, who died in Japanese reprisal attacks on their villages, who fed and sheltered and protected the resistance at personal risk to themselves and their families, they receive a fraction of the recognition. Many of the Filipino veterans who served under guerrilla command during the war are denied the full benefits promised to them by the United States government. The Rescission Act of 1946, passed by the American Congress less than a year after the war ends, strips Filipino veterans of the military status that would have entitled them to pensions, health care, and the GI Bill. Tens of thousands of men who fought alongside American forces, in the guerrillas, in the regular army, in the resistance, spend the rest of their lives fighting a bureaucratic war for recognition that many of them never win. Fertig's stars were pinned to his collar by his own hand. The Filipinos who followed him earned everything they were promised. There is a lesson in this story that has nothing to do with military strategy or wartime heroism. It is this: the most powerful force in any conflict is not the side with the best weapons, or the most soldiers, or the most sophisticated equipment. It is the side that cannot be made to stop believing in something. Japan had everything in 1942. Overwhelming numbers, modern weapons, total air and naval superiority, and the momentum of an empire expanding across half the Pacific. What they could not account for was a Filipino fisherman who memorized a patrol schedule, a school teacher who hid a radio transmitter under her classroom floor, a farmer who decided that no matter how many soldiers marched through his village, he was not going to tell them anything. Wendell Fertig was the ghost that Japan could never catch, but the jungle that hid him was made of people. And those people,
the ones whose names nobody recorded, whose stories nobody made films about, whose pensions were taken away by a government they had bled for. Those people are the real story of Mindanao's resistance. Remember them.